And it's a very, very good morning from Parktown. Good morning from Aki Anastasiou. And welcome to the Business Day Dialogues in partnership with Altron People Solutions. Hope that you guys are well wherever you are around the country. It's just wonderful to have you with us. This is the new normal, right? You're attending this conference. You are working remotely wherever you might be. In fact, do tell us where you are at the moment. Just introduce yourselves on the chat over there. You'll see the chat on. We all know how to use the chat right now. I'm sure you've changed your images and your emojis. Gosh, some people are coming up with some fancy things on these virtual calls. But it's really wonderful to have you all with us this morning. And I think we're going to talk about such an important topic. You talk about digital business transformation and why digital adoption is key. And I guess that this is the new buzzword, right? Everyone is talking about it. And, it's amazing to think that here we are in the month of May 2021. And I just need to remind you what it was like back in 2020, in March. In the beginning of March, we kind of heard about this pandemic. Well, we heard about it in January. We thought, well, it's never going to affect us. Then when it was declared a pandemic and when the country started taking action, I'll never forget those days when that last middle week, I guess, in March, when the President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that there's going to be this lockdown happening across the country and everything was just shut down. So what did businesses do? They had to digitally transform. We had to scale up. Businesses, what was impossible soon became possible. And it's all through technology, right? If this had happened, say, 10 years ago, it would have been a totally different picture. Cloud adoption has matured. Businesses have got the flexibility and the agility to really deploy these work-from-home solutions. But the reality is we've got a lot more work to do. And this is going to be the new way of doing things, I guess. I'm talking to many executives during the lockdown. Everybody thought that by January 2021, it's all going to be back to normal. We'll be back at work and things will be back to normal. Well, guess what? We're still doing these things virtually. So do tell us exactly where you're from. And I'm also interested to know, right, which of you are still working remotely? Who has not gone back to the office since the lockdown? I'm really curious to know. And those of you who are back at the office, how many times a week do you go to the office? And how many times have you been to the office since the lockdown was introduced back in March 2020? Now, the hashtag for today's event is hashtag Altron People Solutions, hashtag Business Day. It's going to be such an exciting discussion we're going to be having. And I want to give a special welcome to my speakers, two joining me here in the studio and one joining me on Zoom. But let me start off. Priscilla Rampathi is sitting right next to me. Priscilla is the Managing Director of Altron People Solutions. Hello, Priscilla.
Hello, Aki.
Nice to see you. When was the last time you were in the office?
Last week.
Last week. Okay, but you're the big boss, but I guess, is most of your office still working remotely?
Because we have contact centers, a lot of the staff are expected to be in the office.
Okay.
But we have a combination of in the office and work from home.
Fantastic. DARRYL Marcus is the head of business development and CX enabling technologies at Altron People Solutions. How are you doing? Nice to see you, DARRYL.
And you too, Aki. Good to see you too.
Have you been back at the office? I guess you're very hands-on, right, operationally?
So yeah, also dovetailing between working from home and office.
Yeah.
It's often great to be face-to-face. And because you have the contact center and everyone's there, it does make sense to sometimes be in the office.
Yeah. But I guess that if you look at 365 days, the last year, you can probably count it on your hands how many times you've been back at the office, right? You haven't been back for more than 30 days, that's for sure, in total. So interesting. And it's a great pleasure to welcome my mate who I've known for such a long time. He's an inspiration to so many people. He's written so many different books, and he really, what we are talking about today runs through his DNA. John SANEI, Futures Specialist and Strategist in Cape Town, joining us via Zoom. Hello, John. How are you doing, my friend?
Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful to be with you all. Really looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I want to ask each of you, and let me start off with you, John. You have been speaking about digital transformation even before the pandemic even started, right? How do you define digital transformation? What's your overview on digital transformation and where we are?
Well, obviously, digitization has been with us for the last 20 odd years. And so the internet has really started to pick up a sort of maturity to a certain extent. And we're starting to now really start to understand it with a lot more detail. I do think that what we need to realize that what digitization is actually doing to us is fast tracking us to really redesign what work looks like and how we add value to the world. I think what we must also really keep in mind, on top of mind, is automation. You know, automation is going to be pretty much taking out every single type of job's basic underbelly. In other words, anything that needs to be seen with efficiency or process-driven processes will be automated, whether you're a doctor or an accountant or a blue-collar worker. And also we must realize that the surplus society that we come from, the society that has educated people in the same way for the last 100 years, is also starting to come to an end. So we have two new things that are happening, and I think these need to be taken into account. The first one is that we are seeing a massive move away from surplus economy to passion economy, and we can unpack that a little bit later. And also we're moving away from digitization to dispersion. And again, we can unpack those topics as well as we go through the day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I was reading some fascinating research. I mean, they've been tracking this kind of stuff that you're talking about, and they reckon that by 2025, you know, what we're currently doing right now, 30% of the tasks that we currently do day to day are going to be automated in some way or another. So I guess to your point, it's happening without us even realizing it. And I think if you look at this device here, the smartphone that we've got on our hands, and how that's revolutionized how we do things. I mean, just how we commute, for example, we use the maps. I mean, I know that you do a lot of sports stuff, you know, that stuff's all automated in the back end. It takes your heart rate and measures it and gives you some precise statistics for you to work on. But from a work point of view, Priscilla, I mean, it's so interesting when you look at this digital transformation. And I guess that what's happened is that many organizations had this on their timeline for something to happen. Well, the transformation's been taking place, but I think COVID has accelerated it to such a point that whatever people were working on 3, 4, 5 years from now, they've now done it, and they're thinking even ahead of that, right? Is that your viewpoint? How do you see digital transformation?
Absolutely, Aki. I think digital transformation started quite a few years back, but it wasn't a point of urgency, you know,
Yes.
for companies and for individuals.
Right.
And with COVID coming along, that journey has been accelerated, but accelerated from multiple points of view, you know, so accelerated from an organizational point of view, and how do we do things differently in order to survive within the COVID environment, also accelerated from an employee point of view. So how do I take digital adoption and digital transformation and adopt that within my organization? But also, if you look at the skills within the country, how do we create those skills for the future in order to be able to adopt digital transformation?
Do you think that we're lacking that? Because if you talk to most people, they say that skills is a big challenge in our country. These kind of skills that we're talking about to adopt digitally are, I mean, there's just a massive gap in the country at the moment.
100%. And I think there's lots of interventions underway. So we've identified as a country that it is a skills gap.
Yeah.
You know, and with industry bodies, these skills gaps are being addressed at the moment.
And to the audience out there, you know, we really want you to be part of this discussion. And if you've got any comments that you want to make, we'd love you to share your experiences that you've experienced with digital transformation. I'm really keen to hear from you out there. And by the way, do introduce yourself. Tell us where you are and which company you're representing and what brings you here today. But yeah, it's such an interesting journey. And you talk about people. And the biggest hurdle to digital transformation is, in fact, people. You speak to most executives, you know, that's what one of the big hurdles they highlight to really get this process going. But now, Darryl, I mean, you've seen some really interesting stuff happening because you're very much hands-on the business development and the CX enabling technologies. What's your take on this digital transformation that's happening?
So, Aki, I think you hit the nail on the head a little earlier. I think digital transformation was always something that we spoke about. Very often it was on slide 53 of a deck.
Yes.
Often lip service.
Slide 53, hey? You were paying.
Might have been a little bit further.
You were paying attention to those PowerPoint presentations.
I'll take notes. But I think to your point, I think what happened is, you know, COVID arrived and suddenly digital transformation became the buzzword.
Yes.
And not because it was a buzzword, but because the reality hit that we had to actually transform digitally. I think the exciting space for me was how we as consumers were already evolving and changing. And expectations on customer experience was already evolving and changing. So we were what I refer to as the on-demand economy, where we wanted everything immediately. And in this new world of digital transformation, our consumer preferences and the way we consume information, the way we behave, has also completely moved. And today, we live on our devices.
Yeah.
And the consumer requires everything on their device.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Hey, John, I want to ask you, when you've been talking around the world, you talk to different companies. I mean, as I said earlier, this runs through your DNA. I mean, if there's one country in the world that I don't think there's any country in the world that John hasn't spoken in. He's been on every continent, basically. But John, are you seeing companies keeping up with the pace of this digital transformation? Are you seeing companies making mistakes? Are there going to be casualties from this, from companies who didn't see what was coming? Never mind the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was something that just happened. But if you weren't paying attention to even before that and understanding this transformation that's happening around us, you're going to become a casualty in the same way that Blockbuster Videos did, and BlackBerry, who ignored the main competition. What are you seeing out there, John?
So I think that because of this massive transition, many organizations are struggling because what they're asking their people to do is to keep the old business alive while they also think about the next business. And I think this makes many staff members around the world almost schizophrenic, because it's impossible to keep the old world alive and start to think about new businesses in the new world. So what I always suggest to businesses is try and split your teams into today teams and tomorrow teams. And your today team is all about innovation, efficiency, modifications to your current business structure. But your tomorrow team is focused on disruption. And disruption is all about making your current business model obsolete to create a new business model. And often these two ideologies are put into one executive team's sort of mandate. And this becomes incredibly difficult. Let me give you one quick example. In Japan Airlines is spending $70 million on understanding the future of travel. Now, what they've done is they've developed a whole new sector in their business to do this, because the future of travel, according to them, has got nothing to do with an airport, a pilot, or an airplane. It's got to do with an avatar system, a helmet, and a suit that you can wear, where you get sort of real visceral feelings of heat and cold and pressure, as well as obviously the visual. And they're using this future of travel experimentation with paraplegic people, with sick people that are inside hospital beds, and you can almost travel with anybody around the world to a destination. Now, is this the future of travel? We don't know. But Japan Airlines is experimenting and making sure that they've got one step ahead from anybody else. So yes, organizations that are asking their people to do both are struggling, and organizations that are holding on to their old successes are also struggling. And so we need to bring new people into decision-making processes, more diversity of both women, color, and age, to be able to make decisions for the future that's very different to the past.
That is so interesting. And is that the most impressive company that you've seen, John? I mean, you've worked with many different companies in this entire process. I mean, which are some of the companies, or one of the company that's like really impressed you the most, that you said, wow? And I know that you do a lot of work with the Singularity guys as well, but is there one company that stands out?
You know, it's so funny. It's not a company. It's the government of Dubai. You know, they have a minister of artificial intelligence. They have a minister of blockchain. They have a minister of happiness. Their structure is built to make it the most efficient and happy city in the world. And the way they think about the future is just unbelievable. I mean, do you know any company or any city that has a 2070 plan? I mean, they're thinking that far ahead.
Wow.
So for me, it's not a company. It's that country. And that's why I based myself there for a few months last year, is because I'm just so enthralled by the way they look at the future.
The Minister of Happiness, eh? I mean, imagine walking around and you see the guy feeling a bit down. Hey, smile, man. You're the Minister of Happiness. You're supposed to be setting an example. But it's true. I mean, when you look at these kind of things, I mean, I remember talking at a conference in 2010, the World Cup conference. And it was just before the actual World Cup soccer. And this conference was happening in Cape Town. It was the International Computer Association, or engineers globally. And I'll never forget this. I was the MC at the event, and I was interviewing the CEO of Cisco, and he was in San Francisco, and he appeared via hologram on the stage. That was like, 11 years ago. And at that time, it took massive amounts of data, massive amounts of technologies, but all of that technology has now been democratized. And Virgin Media in the UK have been experimenting with this now. And they're saying that we are very close. In fact, in the next 5 years, it's going to become almost a norm instead of the current Zoom meetings that we have and the Teams meetings that, it's going to be via hologram. So to John's point, you need to think ahead. You need to think what's happening tomorrow. But when you look at this and what John's been talking about and adopting all of these digital technologies, why is that key, Priscilla?
So Aki, for us, digital adoption is key for multiple reasons. And the first reason is you want a return on your investment. So there's no point in investing in technology but not adopting the technology.
Right.
And I think where organizations sometimes get it wrong is they take a piece of technology, implement it, but don't upskill their staff members to use that particular piece of technology. And that is something as an organization we look at and we enable digital adoption. I think also key to digital adoption is your employee capabilities, the skills capabilities. And to John's point, how do you have or how do you manage your current skill sets and how do you create skill sets for the future in order to enable digital adoption? And also key, I think, to digital adoption is your customer journeys. So you understand as an organization where your business needs to go to, and you've got certain digital adoption or digital technologies in place. But what are the customer touch points and what are the things that you need to do to ensure that your customers are getting the maximum benefit from the digital technologies that you've implemented?
I'm so glad you raised customers because, one of the things that, all organizations talk about is customer experience, right? Which is the most important thing. But, organizations don't kind of live that in their DNA to try and produce it. And it comes back even further. And I know you want to comment on that, Darryl, but I guess that we've got these great technologies, right? If the people around you and your customers don't know how to use it to integrate together with your system, you're not unlocking any value. So all these companies are doing this massive digital transformation, but actually the core people within the organization and the customers are unsure how it all works, and you're not unlocking its true value, right?
Exactly.
So maybe I can make a comment.
Yeah, please do.
I think when we talk about experience, there's two experiences we need to factor into the equation and frame in the conversation. There's employee experience, and there's customer experience. From the employee experience point of view, something which we found is that digital move post-COVID into this online world suddenly, went from a novelty to employees actually being quite anxious and showing signs of depression, and that's what the studies are showing. So how do you bridge that gap and bring that employee up? You need to retrain on the soft skill side of things, making sure that the employee is going to embrace the future and take away that anxiety or depression of being stuck at home working in a Teams meeting. And from the customer experience point of view, our worlds have fundamentally changed. What we used to do every day is now completely different. Brick and mortar stores, your shopping has changed, the way you want to engage with a brand has changed, and all of these actually going to that customer experience journey. Where's that journey starting, and how do you curate that seamless customer engagement across the touch points that are so pervasive today, like social media and messaging, etc.
That's so interesting. But how do you actually get your staff engaged? How do you get over that hurdle of getting everybody on board, understanding what you're trying to do, and take them on this digital adoption journey, which is key? We know it has to happen. But how do you get the buy-in from your staff?
So I think the starting point, Aki, is for people to understand your vision. Where are you going as an organization, and why is it key for us to go that route as an organization? And the second component that's key is how are you expected to behave in order to take that forward as an organization? And once people understand the why, it's then easier to build interventions around it. Easier then to say, look, you need to develop these particular sets of skills because this is how it enables our journey going forward. And then also making the actual skills available, the capabilities available and developing those capabilities for employees.
So, it's to John's point earlier, as John was talking about this, is that you've got to empower your workforce. You've got to tell your workforce that we this is how we are going to help you to upskill you and to get this job done, because we've got to move in with the times. and we need to upskill you. We need you to understand the vision that we have as an organization. And if you've just joined us, a warm welcome to you. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. It's the Business Day Dialogue in partnership with Altron People Solutions. And wherever you are around the country, we welcome your comments. We want to hear what your experiences are. Perhaps in your organization, you can tell us what's been implemented that's been really successful, or the stuff that we talk about, the anxiety. And I mean, people have anxiety about change. And it's been so interesting to see. I mean, some of the anxiety I've seen in bricks and mortar stores, which you touched on earlier, that, you know, when the lockdown started, they had to change and they had to bring in e-commerce models. And of course, your entire work chain solution is not designed for e-commerce. Your front-end staff who are dealing with customers are not trained and designed to deal with customers buying things online. You must have seen some really interesting examples, Darryl. I mean, and I also want you to talk on the solutions and some of these examples that you've come across.
Sure. So from a customer experience point of view, we've seen some really, as you say, exciting, fascinating things happening. So the one is, to your point, you know, during lockdown, people, you know, aren't frequenting brick and mortar stores. They cut down going to skeleton staff, but the customer that is there actually does still require assistance. So what we've seen is a proliferation of QR codes, that you can still engage with someone by just scanning a QR code and creating what I refer to as that bridge or the conduit between your customer and the enterprise. And again, it does need to be in a traditional world. Today, the consumer's on their device. They have the device with them, and they're communicating, you know, directly with the organization. I think another fascinating story for me, funny enough, was working with one of our partners in the UK. One of the banks was considering putting QR codes on the back of all their cards. Again, just making it easy for that person to engage with the brand. So we're seeing, you know, a fundamental shift in these elements. But there's a concept that I like to talk about, which is called the digital fortress.
The digital fortress?
Digital fortress.
Okay.
And when I look at the
You've
digital
been playing
fortress,
Fortnite again?
my kids do.
Oh, okay.
A lot.
I love Fortnite. It's been the lockdown de-stressor, actually, but we're talking about digital fortresses.
So I think what happened with COVID is everyone moved into the digital world.
Yeah.
And most organizations had their web strategy, they had an app strategy, they had a social media strategy.
Yes.
They often had an IVR in their contact center to try and just cope with the high volume of calls. Many organizations then went down the route of creating automation via what we refer to as chatbots today. But what they actually didn't do is create the conduit or the highway between that asset and the brand. Now, today we call that the conversational strategy, is giving the ability to have a handshake in those assets and allow the consumer who's consuming information and navigating these assets to have a very easy interface back into the brand. And I think for me, we're seeing a big drive now in organizations moving to what we had as traditional methods of engaging with the organization to a far more digital-first engagement where we're acknowledging that the consumer is using our assets, but still needs to have that link or that bridge or that conduit back into the enterprise, just to assist them over the line. So for me, it's a fascinating space at the moment, and we call it breaking down the digital fortress and creating the front door to your business.
Yeah.
Allowing that consumer to very easily engage with you. That's on the customer side. The other piece, which I think is worth mentioning, is we're seeing the same in our business process outsourcing, where your traditional channels, as you can imagine during COVID, call volumes are going through the roof. You can't cope with the volumes. We're seeing a big drive, even in those environments, to move into what we call the messaging first world. It's just making it easy for that consumer to engage the brand, irrespective of where that customer journey actually starts.
Right.
So that's in the contact center, in the social media, you know, in your on your websites, in your app, creating elements or entry points into your organization. And we're seeing a big shift in our BPO world, where consumers are moving into digital engagements.
Really? Well, it goes to your point about that customer satisfaction and the customer experience. You know, when you're trying to get hold of an organization and the call centers fail, then, you know, it's really, really frustrating. So you've got to give the tools to your customer to be able to engage with you on different facets. I mean, as the managing director of Altron People Solutions, how's your role changed? I mean, when you look at Altron People Solutions, in 30 seconds, what exactly does Altron People Solutions do pre-COVID and now? Because I'm sure that your business strategy has changed as well.
Yeah, and Aki, I think the biggest change for us has been specifically around digital transformation. So prior to COVID, we saw ourselves as a customer experience organization. And with COVID, we quickly had to change how we do things. So our learning business went from classrooms to digital learning solutions. Our BPOs, our contact centers, also now have many more digital offerings within it. And our customer experience offerings also talking a lot more to our customers and our clients to understand what are your needs and how do we enable your customer journey for you. So it's gone from customer experience to a digital organization.
That's so interesting. So interesting. I just want to say hi to a couple of people who've been sending us some messages. And please use that hashtag, folks. It's hashtag Altron People Solutions, hashtag Business Day. We welcome your questions and your thoughts and your comments, whatever they might be. Lovely to have Greg with us this morning. Greg says he's back at the office since September, which was about 5-6 months that you were away. Thankfully, I'm not home in San Francisco. Well, listen, San Francisco is not too bad. Catherine Evans, hello to you. Catherine's been working at home since the lockdown, so she has not gone back to the office yet. Johan Stradom, working remotely from their offices and kind of half-half. And Johan's actually got a great question, and I want to bring John into this. I mean, John, we know that this is happening at a really fast pace, right? And you look at this digital transformation, everybody is like fast-tracking a lot of things. And I guess, you know, what Johan wants to know is, what is the end game? Is there an end game that we're all going to? And I guess with technology, there really isn't an end game, because we're continually evolving. As people, there's no end game, because as the human species, we continually evolve. But there's a lot of focus on digital transformation. What are we transferring from to, is the question that Johan asks. It's a bit of a hospital pass to you, John, because it's a really tough question. But I know that you deal a lot of this kind of stuff and how it impacts society, right?
So the thing for me is that there's a great book called The Fourth Turning that I suggest he reads, the person who asked the question. And what they explain in The Fourth Turning is that humanity goes through these cycles called saichelums. And these saichelums are about a plus minus 80-year cycles that humanity's been going through since the 1600s, or well, since they could track back history. And so what they realized that within these 80-year cycles, what we have are 4 mini cycles. And in these 4 mini cycles, we have almost seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter. The last time an 80-year cycle ended was World War II in 1946, where we saw the destruction and the implosion of the old world. We then saw the beginning of a new world in the late 1940s and early 50s, where we saw the development of the United Nations, the IMF, and all the structures that we're living within right now. We are today in winter, the end of another 80-year cycle, where we start to transition from an industrial revolution, innovation, process-driven society towards a quantum, digital, dynamic society as we move into the first turning. Unfortunately, with all transformations, what we have is the sad, the strange, and the adventure. And we are squarely in the sad and the strange. Things are sad because they're not like they used to be. There's no familiarity. Things are strange because nothing makes sense. We can't anchor ourselves into anything. And so people are desperate for some level of certainty, which unfortunately is not available at the moment. So what we have to do is spend the next few years as we go through this transition, really taking the time to unlearn and relearn what this new world looks like and what skills we need to take in with us. So I definitely foresee education becoming a massive new sector as we start seeing adults retraining themselves for the world that we're moving into, not utilizing and sort of resting on their laurels from their old skill sets. So yes, where are we going to? What's the end point? The end point is the ending of this 80-year cycle, according to the fourth turning, 2026 to 2028. And then really looking forward to a renaissance, a new spring of how we start evolving as humanity.
Wow. Well, listen, I've been watching quite a bit of Vikings on Netflix, and I'm glad that 80-year cycle of the saculum is long past. I mean, as human beings, we've gone through some very violent parts of our history, right? And I guess we're a lot more peaceful now. We're a lot more healthier now. We've got a lot more digital resources to our disposal right now, but yet there's this massive digital divide, right? We're still experiencing that in Africa. But I've been chatting to some really interesting people over the last couple of months, and one of them is this massive organization that's putting out data centers, you know, across the continent. The amount of money that's been spent on the continent, either it is in data centers. I mean, you look at the data centers in South Africa. 3-4 years ago, we didn't have data centers. Now we've got a few. and the amount of fiber that's going into the ground. So where I'm going with this is that our growth curve and our digital transformation is going to be, compared to the way it is in other countries, we're expected to see this massive change in digital transformation across the continent, which is fantastic for all our economies. But are we ready to deal with this digital transformation? To your point earlier, and the societal gap that John was talking about, how do we go about embracing digital transformation? I mean, you got to welcome it with open arms. You've got to be open to change. Change is uncomfortable. You've got to make yourself vulnerable to experience that kind of change. And I think vulnerability is a very, very powerful emotion, right? Because it forces you to change.
So, okay, I think you're 100% correct. I think we live in crazy times where we've got the digital workforce, we've got digital transformation, then we've got these technologies coming at us from all angles, whether it's IoT or cybersecurity or the fourth industrial revolution. But somewhere in between there lies the human being. And the one thing that you can do is to, alleviate that anxiety and depression and empower a person is by using technology to your advantage. And one of the things that we've seen are things like contextual guidance. Enabling a person to learn on the fly using context support when using some of these new technologies that organizations are deploying. And then for the same token, even in the contact center, the agent is still the front of your business, provide agent guidance. Because all that you're doing is you're saying to the agent, we've invested in these technologies, but you as the human being, we're going to take you on that journey with us. We're going to give you the tools to bring you up to speed so that you can use the technologies and the business will see a return on their investment by empowering employees to come on that journey with them.
You wanted to say something, Priscilla?
I do. Aki, for me, there's two key points as well. For me, the one is change management. So we've got digital transformation, but how do we take that and how do we manage the change within our organizations? What are the particular things that we look at when we're managing the change? So do you change your operating model, for example, as an organization? Do you restructure your business? Do you create different types of skills? And closely associated for that for me is agility. So understanding that you may be at a particular point, but the change will probably come quite quick, or it could take a long period of time, but being agile enough to move with those changes as they come along.
Okay. Greg Sarandos in California, still under lockdown, most kids still studying online. I mean, I imagine you guys have got kids, right? They all studying remotely still. I mean, we haven't even touched on the education system and how these kids have been robbed of going to school and associating with peers. I mean, we haven't even touched on those psychological changes that kids experience, right? It's been challenging, I'm sure.
It definitely has been challenging. And I think if you look at our country, we've got two different types of schooling systems. We've got private schooling and the public schooling. And I think the private schooling has been in a better place with regard to the impact of COVID compared to the public schooling. If I look at my kids, easy enough for them to get onto a Zoom call with the teacher, and they've got the necessary protocols in place. So they've been back at school from the 1st of February, whereas we're still having the conversation of when do the kids in public school go back to school full time. And working remotely has challenges for kids as well, because they don't quite understand how to work independently. That skill set still needs to be learned and developed.
That's so interesting. Have you picked up anything interesting?
I think absolutely. I think when you look at this, and once again, you look at a school kid is no different to an employee in a business.
Yes.
And we in our world actually had, our world sort of came to stop. We were running 45 classrooms in a building using, teachers, lecturers, and students in line. COVID hit, and within a few months, 98% of our classrooms are now delivered virtually. So the whole education system has fundamentally shifted, from kids at an early age to even an employee who used to come into an office, sit in training for a day, have a meal in the canteen, go home with a certificate, is now doing the whole thing virtually. And I think that's digital transformation, that chasm that we need to sort of bring together and say we acknowledge that this world has changed, but how do we bring these people on the move with us? I mean, I see myself as a consumer of one. Yes. When I was fundamentally shifted, even as an employee working in the corporate world, suddenly we're on Teams. The word of the year was, you're on mute.
Yes.
Yes.
Or
yes.
You haven't got your all these sort of things. It was
you're
because
yes.
It was because we also had to learn a new way
Yeah.
of doing something which in the past was very natural.
John SANEI, are you optimistic about the future? And I mean, when I say optimistic, and I look at our country and we face our own challenges. I don't have to talk about the economy, but the digital divide that poses so many issues for most of us. And I mean, I was just talking to the universities of South Africa. They were having this conference call, which I was facilitating a couple of months back, and the amount of data that students are using, and we're talking about petabytes of data that universities use. Your average student is probably using something like 50 gigs of data. And here we are in 2021, where many of these students don't have access to the technology. And you look at the cost of data in this country, it's still so prohibitive to be able to enable these kind of technologies. Now, when you compare us to what's happening in Dubai, for example, I mean, okay, it's a different country, it's a different economy altogether. But are you seeing optimistic signs of all of this coming together to benefit our economy and the people of this country, that this digital transformation is not going to put a wedge between the haves and the have-nots?
So, Aki, I mean, obviously that's a big topic that everybody speaks about, and I don't want to take anything away from the people that are suffering in any way. But also, if we just zoom out a bit and we look at digitization on the whole, anytime anything is digitized, it goes through a deceptive stage. And in that deceptive stage, the technology is becoming cheaper, faster, more accessible. And in that process, we have to be patient until it pops out on the other side and totally changes that industry. It happened to communication, it happened to entertainment, it happened to musicians, and it happened to Kodak. Now it's going to start happening much more when it comes to connecting Africa and the poorer countries around the world to the global internet, when companies like Starlink, like forgotten the name now, but there's about 30 companies around the world right now that are putting satellites, balloons, and drones into our orbit. And they're really at the beginning phases of doing that. And in the next 5 or 10 years, everybody will have access to free, fast Wi-Fi. And I know that might seem very long for a lot of people, but truth is that we have more access to more information than ever before. We are able to sell to 4 billion people strong, if not even more, connected to the internet right now. So I don't think it's about haves or have-nots. It's about the initiative that we need to take on to utilize this new tool set to its maximum capabilities. We can't just continuously sit on the sidelines and say, well, poor us, we've been disregarded, it's been a tough time. Yes, all of that noted and all of that given the due respect to. But for the very first time, my domestic lady has 2 cell phones. There's a fast Wi-Fi network in many different taxi ranks. Now, what are we doing to utilize those to have the initiative to propel ourselves into the future? And I think that I'm just tired of any country that talks about the poor me syndrome, because even Americans are doing it. Have you seen the stats around how many Americans don't have access to the internet? And so everybody can take on that tonality, but then we also have kids. I mean, if you've been to the Forbes 30 under 30, you'll see some incredible, brilliant young African minds that have utilized the internet to change the world. And so we all have to take on this responsibility and initiative to be able to utilize this new tool set.
Awesome stuff. Talking digital adoption, digital business transformation. And John, I don't want you to go anywhere there. Now, I want to ask this question to our audience as well. And I'm looking at all of you who are asking us different questions. I'm going to come to your question in just a moment, Joshua. But to the audience that are watching this right now, in the last 14 months, what's been your aha moment? Have you had an aha moment in the last 14 months? When it's linked to digital business transformation, you look at the entire process, but the way you've been doing things, perhaps. What's been your aha moment during the lockdown period? Well, basically, since this pandemic started, I want the audience in the chat box to tell us what's been your aha moment. And John SANEI, what has been your aha moment since the pandemic started?
That the world has become borderless.
Wow.
It's the most amazing thing that we can now talk to anybody around the world, and it's okay to be on Zoom. We don't have to be in the boardroom, in the conference. It's almost like everybody's borderless, and you can actually trade across the world quite comfortably.
Interesting. And what about yourselves, guys? Priscilla, what's been your aha moment?
I think it's the ease with which we can communicate with each other
Yeah.
without having to be in a formal office environment.
Okay. And Darryl, your aha moment?
I think John stole my thunder. I think my aha moment was realizing that suddenly globalization,
Yes.
we got the world at our disposal, and certainly from a in our world at our BPO, the whole world is one place now.
Yeah.
And in South Africa, we have challenges,
Yes.
but we've also got some advantages in doing business in South Africa if you're taking that overseas.
Yeah.
So I think the aha moment for me has been that this virtual world, everyone's operating everywhere, and all those borders and barriers are now, sort of dropped.
It's incredible, the communication and the internet that has broken down these barriers and basically democratized the way we communicate, right? And it's thanks to these data centers. I'd hate to think what would have happened if this pandemic had hit us 10 years ago. Here's a question for all of you, and I don't know who wants to take this one, but it's quite a broad question. Joshua, thank you for the question, by the way, and keep those questions coming into our audience. And I'm still waiting to hear on your aha moments during the lockdown period. Well, we're still in lockdown technically, but since the pandemic started, what have you learned? What's been your aha moment? Now, Joshua's got a question for you, John, and I'm also going to ask this to Priscilla and Darryl. But Joshua wants to know, the adage high-tech, low-touch comes to mind. Do you think this digital progress may well be inadvertently creating a sense of distance and disconnection, not only in terms of brands, but even human connectedness? So I guess it's going against what you said earlier. Is it actually pushing us further apart, or is it bringing us more together? I guess there's a bit of both here, isn't there, John?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. And let me just go back to the sort of business flows that we're seeing around the world. What we had 40, 50 years ago was globalization, 20 years ago, digitization, and now we have dispersion. This new dispersion is dispersing us away from where we used to commute. For example, head offices will never be utilized like they used to be. Shopping centers won't be, hospitals won't be, restaurants won't be. Everything's dispersed away into our individual sort of space. Now, the pro is obviously we have flexibility, more time with family, we can be more healthy. The con, we're disconnected. We have Japan and England adding 2 new ministers to their portfolio, Minister of Loneliness, because we're starting to see so many people commit suicide and disconnect. Also, another this process is that we are not engaging with people from other parts of society. So it's almost like the haves are connected to each other and the have
So I mentioned the concept of the digital fortress.
Right.
And I think in line with the question from Joshua, we need to drop that digital fortress. Don't keep your customers or your employees at an arm's length from the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the key things, or my message in today's times, is we refer to something called the human AI tango. Is AI is there, it's not going to go away, but don't forget that there's the human being. And the ability to move between digital or AI and the human, I think is going to be critical to our success in this adoption. I think pushing too much technology, forgetting that at the end of the day that we are human beings and there are human beings, we need to have this tango between the human being and the technology, and we can't boil the ocean in one go. So slowly, bite that worm. Don't forget about your customer, your employee. Have that human AI tango that bridges the gap between digital transformation technologies and us, human beings, at the end of the day.
Do you know how the word tango scares the living daylights out of me? I went to one of those tango classes. My coordination sucks. I nearly killed people in that tango class, but it's such a beautiful dance. What was that movie with the blind guy doing the tango? It'll come to me.
Oh, with Al Pacino.
Al Pacino, yeah. You know,
Scent of a Woman.
Scent of a Woman,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. I got inspired by the tango there. But yes, that's exactly what it is. You've got to be agile. You've got to move around. I mean, you also wanted to say something with regards to the question that was posed earlier, because it's a fascinating question.
Sorry, Aki, just run through the question
I'm just saying
again.
the question about the fact that we are, high tech, low touch, and creating that sense of distance and disconnection.
Yes.
And as human beings, we all have to adapt to all of this around us.
100%, and we've seen it within the organization as well.
Yes.
When COVID hit in March last year, we had to take our contact centers, and this is traditionally a contact center where you housed employees within the office.
Like everybody in one. And
with COVID, we then had to deploy a work from home strategy, and we enabled our agents to work from home. Oh. But with that, we then saw a sense of isolation coming through, where an employee was now able to work from home, not having to deal with, for example, the challenges around traffic. But that sense of isolation in terms of not being able to connect, So previously, I would see my manager every day and we would have a conversation. Now I've got to connect, for example, via Teams. And we saw an increase in the utilization of the wellness offerings as well, where people wanting to reach out, understand, how do I now, adopt or adapt to having to work differently? What skills do I require? And not knowing, how to do these things, which as organizations we've had to manage.
Yeah, and you know what? There's so much unknown out there. The effects of people working remotely at home, the psychological effects. I mean, and to John's point about the Minister of Happiness and the Minister of Loneliness, I mean, we're learning a lot of stuff about ourselves as human beings. Which brings me to the point, and I want you, as we wrap up this fascinating discussion, I hope you've enjoyed it, by the way, wherever you are, San Francisco, California, I see there are people all over the world joining us. It's absolutely wonderful. But, where is this all going to go? I mean, eventually, the pandemic is going to go away. We don't know, but it'll be in a different form. And I guess we're never going to go back to the way things were before. So when we do go back, I mean, you're already looking at many of the banks in the city center. They're all questioning the fact that, hey, we don't need so much space. This is actually working out pretty well. We've got people there, we've got people here. But of course, company culture comes into this whole digital transformation thing as well, right? But most people are saying that we're going to move back to a kind of a hybrid environment where you'll go and spend some time in the office during the week. There are talks of, hot chairs or hot desks, for example, that you'll book the place that you need. You'll attend your various conferences. But we're going to be living in this hybrid world, right? And I mean, I know some people who've been employed during the lockdown that haven't even been to the office at the company they've been employed at. This is the world that we're living in, because people get hired and people get fired. People have been fired during lockdown as well. But also organizations are talking about, when people do come back, you're going to have reorientation classes to show everybody this is how we now behave in the office. This is where everything is. This is how the coffee station has changed, et cetera, et cetera. So, John, when we do go back, if we do go back, how are we going to go back, and what are we going to go back to, and where are we going, I guess, is my question. And there's so many unanswered questions, and I guess we're all feeling our way through this, but there's kind of a consensus. Most people are talking about that hybrid work environment. What is your sense on this, John?
Well, I mean, Aki, I think that's the billion-dollar question, right? When, how, what does it look like, and what are we going to be like? So let's just backtrack a bit quickly. The virus, COVID-19 started off as a medical virus. It has mutated to become a socio-economic tsunami. So it's not just about trying to find the solution to hybrid work. We have to now realize that the domino effects of what this has created needs to now play out over the next few years. So yes, as far as work is concerned, depending what you do, where you do it, and what position you do it, hybrid can make sense or doesn't make sense. You know, if you're in retail or if you're a blue collar worker, obviously it doesn't make sense at all. But sometimes you have knowledge workers or passion economy workers that can be totally remote. So there isn't one size fits all. It's about what really fits your career, your personality, and what your company requires. But I think a much bigger question to be asking ourselves is, what are we doing to reassess what impact we will bring individually and as an organization as we move through this world? Because if we're not taking the time to unlearn, to relearn, to reskill ourselves, we could find ourselves in a little trouble. And think about, just last point, if you think about the agricultural times moving to the industrial times, the people that were highly skilled in farming and understanding the soil and the seasons were quite useless in the industrial times. And in the industrial times, what you needed was left brain logical thinking that was process driven, that really understood that side of process of life. That is now being automated, and the new world requires intuition, requires social and emotional connections as a currency that we need to start focusing on. So it's this chasm that we need to go through and understand the skills of the old world are not going to be always relevant in the new world.
Fascinating. What's your guys' take on this? Going back, we don't know what we're going to go back to and how we're going to go back to it, but we know that we're going to go back to something. We're definitely not going back to the way things were. So where are we going back to?
I think we're going back to a hybrid, and I don't think we can go back to the way things were done before. You referred to real estate, and lots of organizations are asking the question, you know, do I need that real estate that I had previously when I can enable these tasks to be done from the work from home environment? So it really depends on the industry that you're playing in, and some can very easily have a hybrid model, whereas others may require, you know, like your essential services, you know, employees to be within the work environment.
Yeah. Back to the Future. You remember that movie?
Yes.
And I guess it's very relevant today when you think we're going back to the future, because that's, you know, continually evolving.
So I'll try to reframe the conversation slightly, because I see it not differently, but slightly on the other side. Is no one, in fact, if COVID taught us anything, is there's no crystal ball.
Yes.
No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as a blueprint to this life, this world we're living in. But I think what is exciting for me, and what's going to be fascinating, are the lessons we've learned during these times that I don't think we'll ever go back to doing things the way we did. And I speak again within our context. Virtual classroom training, contextual guidance to employees, giving people access to businesses through channels that we haven't previously used. I think for me, that's the exciting bit of going back, is the new normal we're going to be going back to is a very exciting new normal. And a lot of what we've spoken about today has been expedited, that it's going to become part and parcel of our daily lives. It's pervasive. And when we go back, there won't be a new normal, but there's going to be an exciting environment for us to engage in as employees, as customers, as individuals, as consumers. So for me, it's all about what we've taken out, the lessons that we've learned.
You know, I've so enjoyed listening to all three of you as we've unpacked this topic, because nobody knows where we're going, but I kind of feel like a little bit energized, a little bit anxious, I've got to be honest. But at the same time, I'm pretty excited, because I guess we've all seen the potential that's out there. I mean, John's touched on this potential, that there's tremendous potential, and the technology and this adoption and this transformation is bringing tremendously powerful tools at our disposal that, you know, many organizations didn't have access to before. I mean, I don't have to go through the cloud infrastructure and how the cloud has really fast-tracked so many things. But just in closing, I'm going to ask each of you to give me your 30-second take and your advice to people going through this digital transformation. And John, I'm going to ask you first. I mean, you talk to a lot of people, you give a lot of advice, you've given us a lot of advice today, we've made notes of some of the things that you've said, but what three things would you say to someone in the street to help them and guide them through this particular journey? What would they be?
The first one is, this is not an easy process, and we must become okay with the fact that it's tough. It's a tough thing moving from an old world to a new world, and we're right in the middle of it. The second thing I'd say is, take this time to deal with all your old trauma. Because what's happened is because we've had time on our hands, all this old trauma has come to the surface, and we're all having psychological issues that we think have just been brought on by COVID, but they're actually from many, many years ago. The third thing is once we get over ourselves and heal ourselves, it's time to reskill. Digital transformation is not going anywhere. It's going to become more proliferated. We have new ways of making money. We have new ways of adding value to the world. So one, know that this is painful and become okay with it. Two, understand that trauma is part of us as human beings, heal it. And third, take the energy to reskill yourself for what's coming.
Fantastic, John. Thank you. And what about yourself, Priscilla? What are your 3 tips that you give to individuals and organizations through this digital disruption, this digital innovation, this digital transformation journey that everyone's going through?
I think the first for me, Aki, is take your people on a journey. So understand where you're going and enable your people to go on their journey with you as an organization. We also need to be bold. So the second point is be bold. Relook what you're doing. Can it be done differently? Can it be done in a simpler, more efficient manner? And be agile, because the change is going to come constantly. And if you're stuck in doing it in a particular way, it's not going to work. So agility becomes key in taking this forward.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Darryl? And agility, we're not meaning yoga classes here, hey?
And that wouldn't be me. I can't tango either. So Aki, I think for me, I often say to stakeholders I engage with, whether it's employees or employers or brands or consumers, if you're going to eat the elephant, eat it one bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't rush into this and don't trouble the ocean. We're going to the digital world. Look out for those digital fortresses. Don't break them down. Don't keep your customers at an arm's length from your business. And I think the key for me, and it's something that I use often, is don't forget about that human AI tango. It's that anxiety that you spoke about earlier that we need to acknowledge exists. John also referred to it a little bit earlier. We're going into this world, people are unsure, they're anxious. Use technology, but don't forget about that tango between technology and the human beings. At the end of the day, whether we're in business or in our personal lives, our everyday lives, we're human beings. Yeah. And we're engaging with human beings.
It's just wonderful, wonderful. I mean, what I'm hearing from all of you is that you really got to be open to change. If you close yourself and you keep those blinkers on, you're not going to go anywhere. We're in a forward motion, as John mentioned. We're in a period of change, and you've got to be open, and you've got to open yourself to the 360-degree view, to your point about agility, to look at what's around you and what you can take in, what you can learn. John SANEI, who is in Cape Town, and it's so good to see you, my friend, albeit from a distance. I follow you on Facebook with your cycling and your triathlon training. You're lucky to live in such a beautiful part of the world where you can cycle along the promenade. Good to see you. Thank you for your engagement, and thank you for your incredible words this morning. Much appreciated.
Wonderful to see you all. All the best. Nice to see you, Aki.
Thank you. And to both of you, Darryl Marcus and Priscilla RAMPATHI, it's fantastic to see you guys. I know we're doing this in person and we're following all the social distancing protocols, that we are distance away. We've had our hands sprayed. I've been through this, process of temperature checks and all sorts of other things. But I guess this is where we are today, and it's absolutely wonderful to see you both. Thank you very much, and thank you to Altron for the Altron People Solutions for making this happen today, and thank you to the Business Day Dialogue team as well. And this has been a great partnership, and I hope that our audience has found it enlightening. So thanks to both of you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Aki.
And thank you very much to our audience who've joined us from all over the place. California, Cape Town, I see Windhoek is there. It's really been amazing, and thank you for your input and your incredible questions. By the way, you're going to be receiving an email. You obviously registered to attend today. We'll send you a mailer that if you missed some stuff that you want to really go back to, it's all going to be online. So there will be a recording of this morning's session available. Perhaps you want to share that with colleagues, and it's really valuable information. And as we said earlier, we're all learning so many new things about this incredible business digital transformation, and why digital adoption is key, and why we have to take it with an open approach and be vulnerable to learning and to looking at new things and understanding this process that's happening behind us and around us simultaneously. So nobody knows the answers, but we're in a forward motion, and we certainly are going back to the future. So on behalf of the team at Business Day Dialogues in partnership with Altron People Solutions, thank you for joining us this morning. Do enjoy your day further.